4 years ago, at Dad's funeral, my sister stole my fiancé and laughed in my face. Poor Demi, 38 and alone. No one wants a cold soldier, she said with a smirk. I didn't argue. I smiled. Meet my husband. Marcus stepped into the room. Her glass slipped, shattered at her feet, and she froze the second she realized who he was. Can you imagine standing at your own father's funeral, a day meant for sacred grief, only to have your older sister lean in and whisper, "No wonder Darren chose my softness, holding you was like hugging a log"? That's what happened to me, and it was just the beginning of the most humiliating, yet ultimately victorious day of my life. I'm Demi James, 38 years old, a captain in the United States Army. And today, I stood completely alone at my father's funeral. In my solemn dress blues, I held my back straight, while my heart shattered inside my chest. A light drizzle fell over Ohio, the damp chill seeping through the layers of wool in my uniform. I stood guard by my father's casket, my patent leather shoes stained with the mud of the cemetery. The bugle notes of taps pierced the silence, the most sacred sound to a military family, a moment when every head should bow in reverence. But not today. The solemnity was shattered by the distinct click-clack of stilettos on stone. Vanessa approached, and a cloud of Chanel No. 5 suffocated the delicate scent of the white lilies surrounding the grave. She didn't look at Dad's photo. Instead, she scanned the crowd, checking to see if anyone was admiring her custom-cut black dress. Her presence felt like spilling a bottle of black ink over the final dignified portrait of my father. Vanessa stood too close to me, feigning the posture of a comforting sister for the onlookers, but her words were pure, distilled venom. "God damn," she clicked her tongue, her hand smoothing my lapel as if brushing off dirt. "Look at you. 38 years old, no husband, no kids, just these cold metal medals on your chest. Dad must have been so sad to see his youngest fail like this." She leaned into my ear, whispering cruelly so no one else could hear. "Darren was right. You were born to be a soldier, to suffer, not to be loved. Men need a woman, not a commander." Every word was a dagger aimed straight at my self-esteem. But I was not allowed to cry. A soldier does not weep before the enemy. I stared straight ahead, fixing my eyes on the horizon, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a single tear. Then Darren appeared. He stepped out of a rented Mercedes S-Class, adjusting a silk tie that looked far too expensive for the occasion. He was heavier than I remembered, his face shiny with the grease of a man who thinks he's bought the American dream. He walked straight to me, not to offer condolences but to gloat. "Hello, Demi," he said, his voice dripping with patronage. "I heard you're still at that middle-of-nowhere base in Seattle? JBLM, right? It's a shame. If you had learned to be a little softer back then, maybe you'd be enjoying life like Vanessa is now." He looked at me with pity, the kind of look you give a stray dog shivering in the rain. He wanted me to see it. He wanted to validate that he discarded me to choose a better, more feminine version. He stood next to Vanessa, their arms linking, presenting themselves as the perfect, successful couple amidst my grief. But the most painful part wasn't their words. It was the crowd. My aunts and uncles, the same people who praised me when I graduated from West Point, now shook their heads at me with awkward sympathy. They swarmed around Vanessa, oohing and awing over the diamond ring on her finger. I knew for a fact it was financed, likely a credit card that they were drowning in, but to these people it looked like success. Vanessa did so well for herself, they whispered loud enough for me to hear. Such a lucky girl. I stood there, completely isolated within my own bloodline. They worshipped the homewrecker and the traitor simply because of the flashy exterior. I made a fist inside my white glove, my fingernails digging deep into my palm until it stung. "Yeah, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." I recited Psalm 23 silently in my head. It was the only thing keeping me from screaming. I will not break. Not here. Not today. I watched as Darren walked over to the memorial table. He pulled a pen from his breast pocket to sign the guest book. It was a Mont Blanc glossy black with a gold clip. He flourished his signature, making a show of it, letting the light catch the resin barrel of the pen. My breath hitched. That pen, it wasn't just a pen. It was a trigger. The sight of that glossy black instrument in his hand dragged me violently away from the cemetery, pulling me back 4 years into the past, to the moment that pen signed away my innocence. The glossy shine of that Mont Blanc pen in Darren's hand acted like a hypnotic trigger, dragging my consciousness backward. The gray skies of the cemetery dissolved, replaced by the warm, humid air of a late summer evening 4 years ago. I was a different person then. I was 24, a first lieutenant, and naively optimistic. I had just returned from a grueling 2-week field training exercise. My boots were caked in dried mud. My hair was a disaster of frizz and sweat, tied back in a messy bun, and I smelled like diesel fuel and damp earth. But I didn't care. I didn't go home to shower. I wanted to see him first. I drove straight to Darren's office in downtown Columbus. On the passenger seat sat a white paper takeout bag from Siam Orchid, filling my Jeep with the savory aroma of pad thai and peanut sauce. It was his favorite. I smiled to myself as I merged onto the highway, rehearsing the moment in my head. I imagined him looking up from his desk, tired from working late as he always claimed, his face lighting up when he saw me. He would hug me, dirt and all, and say, "Welcome home, warrior." I truly believed Darren was my safe harbor. In a life defined by strict orders and harsh deployments, I thought he was the one civilian softness I was allowed to keep. I was wrong. It was a fatal miscalculation. The office building was silent at 8 p.m. The janitorial staff had already left, leaving the hallways dim and echoing. I walked softly toward his corner office, my combat boots surprisingly quiet on the industrial carpet. I wanted to surprise him. I gripped the warm takeout bag, my heart fluttering with that stupid, innocent excitement. But 10 feet from his door I froze. It wasn't a sound that stopped me. It was a smell heavy, floral, suffocating. It was the scent of gardenia, not the fresh flower, but the cloying, overly sweet perfume that hung in the air like a fog. It wasn't my scent. I wore light citrus notes. If anything, this smell belonged to only one person I knew. It was the signature scent of my sister, Vanessa. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, not from anticipation anymore, but from a sudden sickening dread. My stomach churned, the smell of the pad thai suddenly mixing with the perfume to create a nauseating cocktail. Then came the sounds. I heard a giggle. It was that high-pitched, performative laugh Vanessa used when she wanted something expensive. Then came the low murmur of a man's voice. "Don't worry about her." Darren's voice drifted through the partially open door. It wasn't the respectful tone he used with me. It was mocking, slurred with lust. "Demi is as dry as a roof tile. She wouldn't know passion if it hit her in the face." "Poor thing," Vanessa purred. "She tries so hard to be a man." The blood drained from my face. My hands went numb. I didn't want to believe it. I needed to see it. I needed the visual confirmation to kill the hope that was still gasping for air inside me. I pushed the heavy oak door open. The bag of food slipped from my fingers. It hit the floor with a wet thud, the container bursting open. Steaming noodles and orange sauce splattered across the pristine carpet, but neither of them looked at the mess. They looked at me. The scene before me was a tableau of absolute betrayal. They were entangled on the leather Chesterfield sofa in the corner. But what made my vision blur with rage wasn't just the nudity. It was what Vanessa was wearing. Draped over her shoulders, unbuttoned and loose, was my camouflage army shirt. The one with my name tape, James, stitched over the heart. The shirt I had earned through sweat and tears. She was wearing my honor like a cheap piece of lingerie. Darren scrambled up, his face draining of color, looking like a deer caught in headlights. "Demi, it's not." But Vanessa. She didn't scramble. She didn't cover herself in shame. She slowly ran a hand through her messy hair, pulling my shirt tighter around her bare skin. She looked me up and down, taking in my muddy boots and tired face. Then she smirked. It was a smile of pure victory. Her eyes said everything she didn't need to speak aloud. "I won. You lost. You served the country. I served myself to your man." I waited for the tears. They didn't come. I waited for the urge to scream, to throw a vase, to claw her eyes out. That didn't come either. Instead, a profound, icy silence filled my veins. It was the switch flipping. In the military, they teach you that when an ambush happens, you don't panic. You assess. You react. I looked at Darren, who was now trying to pull his pants up, looking pathetic and soft. Then I looked at the engagement ring on my left hand, a solitaire diamond that I had been so proud to show off. Now it just looked like a shackle. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled the ring off my finger. My hand felt lighter instantly. I walked to the glass coffee table in front of them. I didn't throw the ring. I placed it down with a sharp, deliberate clink against the glass. The sound rang out like a judge's gavel. "You two pieces of trash deserve each other," I said. My voice was steady, void of any emotion. It scared me how calm I sounded. I turned my back on them. I left the ruined food on the floor. I left the man I thought I loved. I left my sister. And I left the old Demi in that room. I walked out to the parking lot, the cool night air hitting my face. I climbed into my Jeep, the engine roaring to life, drowning out the silence of my shattered life. I didn't look back at the office window. I just put the car in drive and headed toward the interstate. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay in Ohio a second longer. That night, I didn't just pack. I evacuated. I threw my duffel bags and a box of essential documents into the back of my old Jeep Wrangler like I was fleeing a war zone. In a way I requested an immediate transfer to Joint Base Lewis McChord, or JBLM in Washington State, the furthest possible point on the map from Ohio without swimming into the Pacific Ocean. The drive was a 3,000-mile blur of asphalt and misery. I drove like a fugitive fueled by gas station coffee and a burning acidic rage. I didn't turn on the radio once. I couldn't bear to hear love songs or happy pop music. I just listened to the drone of the tires on the interstate and the roar of the engine. Every time I stopped at a red light or got stuck in construction traffic, that image flashed in my mind. Vanessa wearing my name tape, smirking at me. It haunted me across the cornfields of the Midwest, through the mountains of Montana, and all the way into the gray, drizzly embrace of the Pacific Northwest. I arrived in Seattle at dawn. The city greeted me with a heavy curtain of rain and a sky the color of a bruised plum. I had no friends here, no family, and thanks to the deposit I had put down on a wedding venue that wouldn't refund me, my bank account was running on fumes. I couldn't afford a nice place in the city, and the on-base housing list was miles long. So I found a studio apartment off-base in Tacoma. It was a dive. The carpet smelled of decades of stale cigarette smoke and damp wool, a scent that no amount of air freshener could mask. The walls were paper-thin. Every night, I could hear my neighbors arguing about money, their voices vibrating through the plaster, reminding me that misery loves company. For the first 6 months my dinner menu didn't vary. It was the struggle meal of every broke college student and underpaid soldier in America. Moroccan chicken-flavored ramen, 25 cents a pack. I didn't have a dining table. I sat on the cold linoleum floor of my kitchenette, crisscross applesauce, holding a styrofoam cup of noodles. The steam hit my face, doing nothing to warm the chill inside my chest. One Tuesday night, while swirling the salty, processed noodles with a plastic fork, I made the mistake of opening Instagram. There they were. Vanessa had posted a carousel of photos. She and Darren were at an all-inclusive resort in Cabo San Lucas. In one photo they were holding tropical cocktails, the turquoise ocean glistening behind them. Vanessa was tanned, glowing, and wearing a diamond ring, my replacement, that caught the sunlight. The caption read, "Finally found my soulmate. Living the blessed life." I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. I was eating 25-cent noodles on a dirty floor in a rainy city, while the woman who betrayed her own blood was sipping margaritas in paradise on my ex-fiancé's dime. The injustice of it felt physical, like a punch to the gut. Why did the villains get the happy ending? Why was I, the one who followed the rules and lived with honor, the one left shivering in the dark? At work I became a ghost. I showed up to the base every morning at 0600 sharp. I did my job with mechanical precision. I processed logistics requests, managed supply chains, and shouted orders when necessary. But I was hollow. I avoided the mess hall. I turned down every invitation for Friday night drinks. I was terrified that if I let anyone get too close, they would see the cracks in my armor. They would see that Captain James, the stoic officer, was actually a broken woman who couldn't even keep a man. The isolation started to mess with my head. Late at night, when the rain lashed against my single window pane, the gaslighting started to work. I began to replay Vanessa's insults. Maybe she was right, I thought. Maybe I am too dry. Maybe I'm unlovable. Maybe I'm just a machine made for war, not for a home. I was spiraling. I was drowning in plain sight and nobody knew. Then came the hand of a stranger. It was a Friday afternoon in November, and the rain was coming down in sheets. I was rushing to my Jeep in the parking lot, head down, just trying to escape another weekend of solitude. Captain James. I stopped. Standing near the exit was Ruth, a civilian employee from the finance department. I didn't know her well, just exchanged emails about budget approvals. Ruth was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She walked right up to me, ignoring the rain soaking her coat. She looked me dead in the eye, not with pity, but with a piercing understanding. "You look like you've been carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders for about 6 months too long," Ruth said. Her voice was steady. "I'm going to grab a beer at the craft pub down the street. A good strong IPA. You're coming with me." I opened my mouth to recite my usual excuse, paperwork, tired, busy. But the warmth in Ruth's expression stopped me. It was the first time in half a year someone had looked at me like a human being, not a rank. "Okay," I whispered. We went to a small, dimly lit bar that smelled of hops and wood polish. Ruth ordered a pitcher of local IPA. She didn't pry. She didn't ask about my family or why I looked so haunted. She just talked about her dogs and the terrible traffic on I-5. After the second pint, the dam broke. I didn't mean to, but a tear slipped down my cheek and landed on the wooden table. Then another. Ruth didn't flinch. She just handed me a napkin and waited. When I finally composed myself, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small cream-colored business card. She slid it across the table to me. Dr. Patricia Chin, Trauma and PTSD Specialist for Veterans. I've been where you are, Demi, Ruth said softly. You're a warrior, honey. But even warriors need a medic sometimes. Don't let your past define who you are. Fight for yourself. I stared at the card. The edges were sharp, the font simple. It was just a piece of paper, but in the dim light of that bar, it looked like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Picked it up. My hand was trembling, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel entirely alone. Dr. Patricia Chin's office was nothing like the sleek, leather-filled executive suite, where my heart had been shattered 4 years ago. There was no mahogany desk, no smell of expensive cologne or hidden betrayal. It was a small cozy room that smelled of old paper and peppermint tea. Books on trauma and stoicism were stacked haphazardly on the floor, and the chairs were simple fabric, worn soft by the weight of 1,000 soldiers seeking peace. I sat there, my knuckles white as I gripped my knees. It had taken me 3 sessions just to say the words out loud. I feel like I've lost my womanhood. I confessed, my voice barely a whisper. Vanessa was right. I'm just a machine that follows orders. I'm dry. I'm hard. I'm not soft. Dr. Chin took off her reading glasses and looked me dead in the eye. Demi, who told you that softness is the only definition of a woman? Was it a fashion magazine? Was it your sister? She leaned forward. Loyalty, resilience, the capacity to protect others. Those aren't exclusively male traits. Those are human virtues. You aren't dry, Demi. You're fortified. That statement hit me like a bolt of lightning. For 4 years, I had let the villains of my story hold the pen. I had let a cheater and a narcissist define my value. Dr. Chin introduced me to the philosophy of Marcus Aurelius. Specifically, one concept that became my mantra. The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. If they were fake, I would be real. If they were cruel, I would be disciplined. That discipline started the next morning at 0430. Seattle was still wrapped in a thick, gray duvet of fog when I laced up my running shoes. I hit the trail around Lake Washington. The cold dampness of the Pacific Northwest air burned my lungs, but I welcomed the pain. It was a clean pain. It was honest. I ran until my legs screamed. I ran until the sweat and the misty rain washed away the ghostly feeling of Vanessa's hand on my shoulder. I remembered the oath I took when I joined the army. I will never accept defeat. Why had I applied that to the Taliban but surrendered to a family dispute? As the weeks turned into months, my body transformed. The stress weight melted away, replaced by lean muscle. My posture changed. I stopped looking at the pavement when I walked. I held my chin parallel to the ground. I had survived combat zones. I would survive the memory of Ohio. Discipline saved my body, but it was the chosen family that saved my heart. Ruth, the woman who found me in the rain, dragged me to a unit barbecue one Saturday. In the past, I would have made an excuse. I hated seeing happy families because they reminded me of what I didn't have. But this time I went. The smell of charcoal and barbecue sauce hit me before I even opened the gate to Sergeant Miller's backyard. Rock music was playing from a portable speaker, and kids were running through a sprinkler on the lawn. Captain Miller shouted from the grill, waving a pair of tongs. Grab a cold one. Ribs are almost done. Nobody asked, "Where is your husband?" Nobody looked at my ringless finger with pity. They just handed me a cold can of lager and a paper plate piled high with potato salad and ribs. We laughed about the terrible coffee at the mess hall and debated which football team was going to blow it this year. In that backyard, amidst the laughter and the smell of grilled meat, I realized something profound. Family isn't just whose DNA you share. Family are the people who stand next to you in the trenches. Family are the ones who don't let you stand out in the rain. 6 months of therapy, running, and healing culminated in a single email. I was promoted. The notification hit my inbox on a Tuesday. Strategic Logistics Manager for the entire Northwest region. It was a massive step up, putting me in charge of multi-million-dollar defense contracts. To celebrate, I did something the old Demi would never have done. I drove downtown to the Nordstrom flagship store. I walked into the cosmetics department, ignoring the pastel pinks and soft nudes that Vanessa always said were ladylike. I went straight for the boldest shade I could find. It was a deep, rich burgundy. I remembered Vanessa's voice in my head. That color makes you look old, Demi. It's too aggressive. I bought it. I went to the car, flipped down the visor mirror and applied the lipstick. It glided on smooth and dark, the color of a fine wine, or perhaps the color of dried blood on a bandage. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back wasn't dry. She wasn't a victim. She looked powerful. She looked mysterious. She looked like someone you didn't want to mess with. I smiled and my teeth looked white against the dark red. This wasn't makeup. This was war paint. I started the engine of my Jeep. I had a new rank, a new confidence, and a new mission. And little did I know, this new promotion was about to put me in a room with a man who would change everything. The boardrooms of the Pacific Northwest were small, and I was about to walk into a meeting that would rewrite my destiny. My promotion to Strategic Logistics Manager didn't just change my rank. It changed the room I was standing in. Instead of muddy field tents, I was now walking into high-level procurement meetings at the Pentagon's Western Regional Office. And that is where I met the man who would redefine everything I thought I knew about love. Marcus Hamilton was sitting at the head of the mahogany conference table. He was the CEO of Apex Defense, the largest military contractor in the region. Unlike the loud, flashy businessmen I was used to, men like Darren, who wore their wealth like a neon sign, Marcus exuded quiet luxury. He wore a charcoal gray suit that fit him so perfectly it had to be bespoke. There were no visible logos, no flashy gold cufflinks, but I knew the fabric was richer and more expensive than Darren's entire wardrobe combined. When I stood up to present my report on supply chain vulnerabilities, Marcus didn't check his watch. He didn't look at his phone, and most importantly, he didn't stare at my chest or my legs. He looked me dead in the eye. He listened. He took notes with a vintage fountain pen, his movements precise and deliberate. When I finished, the room was silent. Marcus capped his pen and leaned back. "Captain James," he said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that commanded the room without shouting. "That was the sharpest analysis of the Pacific supply route I have heard in 5 years. You just saved my company and the taxpayers millions." He wasn't flattering me to get into my pants. He was respecting my brain. For a woman who had been told she was too dry and too rigid, being admired for my competence felt like drinking cool water after a long march in the desert. 2 weeks later, he invited me to dinner. He didn't take me to a 5-star hotel with a dress code where he could show me off like a trophy. He took me to Pike Place Market. We walked down Post Alley to the Pink Door. There was no sign, just a faded pink door and a brick wall. It was a place for locals, for people who knew quality and didn't need to advertise it. We sat on the deck overlooking Elliott Bay, the ferry boats cutting through the dark water below. When the waiter arrived, I instinctively froze. My muscle memory from 4 years with Darren kicked in. Darren always ordered for me. "She'll have the garden salad dressing on the side. We're watching her waistline." Marcus simply handed me the menu and smiled. "The lasagna here is legendary, but get whatever makes you happy, Demi." I ordered the lasagna, rich, cheesy, and full of carbs. And as we ate, we talked. We didn't talk about money or gossip. We talked about architecture, about the geopolitical shifts in Europe, about old jazz records. When we walked back to the parking garage, I braced myself to see a flashy sports car. Instead, Marcus unlocked a dark blue Volvo SUV. A Volvo. I teased him, raising an eyebrow. "Safest car on the road," he said with a shrug, opening the door for me. "I don't need to prove I'm fast. I need to know I'm getting home in one piece." That was it. That was the moment I fell for him. Marcus was a mountain. Solid, immovable, and safe. Darren had been a balloon. Colorful, full of hot air and waiting to pop. 3 months later, the universe revealed its sense of humor. We were driving back from a weekend hike in the Cascades. Marcus was relaxed, one hand on the steering wheel, talking about a recent win for his company. "It was a headache," he admitted, chuckling darkly. "We were competing against this logistics firm from the East Coast for a $50 million government contract. A company called Mitchell Logistics." My heart stopped. I stared at his profile. "Mitchell Logistics?" "Yeah," Marcus continued, oblivious to my shock. "The guy running it, Darren Mitchell, I think. He tried to wine and dine the procurement officers, real flashy guy. But I had my team run a background check on his financials. The guy is drowning. He's leveraging debt to pay off debt. His books are cooked. We exposed it, and the DoD dropped him immediately." I looked out the window to hide the shaking of my hands. Darren, the man who told me I was nothing, the man who had built his life on a foundation of lies, was currently being dismantled by the man holding my hand. Marcus didn't even know he was my avenging angel. He was just doing business with integrity. And in doing so, he was destroying the man who lacked it. 2 years later, on Christmas Eve, Marcus changed my name. There was no flash mob, no drone filming us for Instagram. It was just the two of us in our living room, the only light coming from the crackling fireplace. Marcus got down on one knee. He opened a velvet box. Inside sat a stone that took my breath away. It wasn't a generic diamond. It was a deep velvety cashmere sapphire surrounded by a halo of small diamonds. It looked like the ocean at night. "Look inside the band," he whispered. I tilted the ring to the firelight. Engraved in the platinum were 2 words, Semper Fidelis, always faithful. "Demi," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I love the woman you are. But I also love the soldier in you. I love the scar under your chin. I love your strength. I want to be your rearguard for the rest of this life. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down my face hot and fast. Darren had betrayed every vow he ever made. But Marcus had engraved his loyalty into metal before he even asked the question. I nodded, unable to speak. He slid the ring onto my finger. Fit perfectly. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just deployed. I was home. After the funeral, the mourners retreated to my parents' old colonial house. But what should have been a somber gathering to honor a decorated veteran turned into a grotesque cocktail party hosted by my sister. Vanessa had transformed the living room into a stage for her own vanity. She was swirling a glass of Pinot Noir, laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny, while Darren held court in the center of the room like a king. I, on the other hand, was being treated like the help. "Demi." Vanessa snapped her fingers at me across the room. "We're out of ice. Go to the kitchen and get another bag. And honestly, can you change out of that costume? The uniform is making the guests uncomfortable. It's so aggressive." My jaw tightened until my teeth ached. She called my dress blues, the uniform I had worn while burying friends, the uniform I had sweat and bled for, a costume. I walked to the kitchen, gripping the silver ice bucket so hard my knuckles turned white. I looked around the house I grew up in. It was filled with strangers, business associates Darren had invited to network. They didn't know my father's favorite song. They didn't know he liked his coffee black. They were just here to stare at Darren's gold Rolex and listen to him brag about his upcoming $1 million projects. They were vultures, picking at the carcass of my family's grief. I returned with the ice just as Darren tapped a spoon against his champagne flute. The room fell silent. "I'd like to propose a toast," Darren boomed, his face flushed with alcohol. He put on a mask of solemnity that was so thin it was transparent. "To my late father-in-law, a good man. And I want everyone to know that Vanessa and I have no regrets. Over the last few years we spared no expense. We paid for the best doctors, the private nursing care, everything. We wanted him to have the best, regardless of the cost." The air left my lungs. A hot, blinding rage shot up my spine. He paid? The truth was, a ledger burned into my brain. I was the one who wired $3,000 home every month. I was the one who took out a personal loan to pay for the hospice care because his insurance didn't cover it. I was the one eating 25-cent ramen noodles in a freezing apartment in Tacoma, so that Dad could have dignity in his final days. Darren and Vanessa hadn't contributed a single dime. They had sent fruit baskets. And now he was standing there, stealing my sacrifice to polish his own ego. He was building a monument to his generosity on the foundation of my poverty. The crowd murmured their approval. "Such a good son-in-law," my aunt whispered. "So generous." I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table. But before I could move, Vanessa glided over to me, looping her arm through Darren's. She looked at me with a sickeningly sweet smile, the kind a predator gives before the kill. "You know, Demi," she said, her voice projecting so the whole room could hear. "Darren and I were talking. We think it's time you stop this soldier phase. It's been long enough." She paused for effect. "You should discharge. Come home. Darren is willing to hire you at his logistics firm. You can be his executive assistant. You'd make double what the army pays you, and the work is much more suitable for a woman your age. You know, making coffee, scheduling appointments, organizing files. It's better than running around in the mud pretending to be a man." The room erupted in polite, chuckling laughter. My relatives nodded in agreement. "That's a great offer, Demi," Uncle Bob said, raising his beer. "You should take it. Maybe you'll finally find a husband if you're in a corporate office." That was it. The final line had been crossed. They weren't just insulting me anymore. They were spitting on the flag I served. They were reducing a captain in the United States Army, a woman who managed multi-million-dollar supply chains and commanded soldiers, to a coffee girl. They thought my worth was zero because I didn't have a husband or a flashy car. The sadness evaporated. In its place, a cold, crystalline clarity took over. It was the zone. The heartbeat slows. The vision sharpens. The target is locked. I set the ice bucket down on the coffee table. Thud. The sound was heavy enough to cut through the chatter. I slowly pulled off my white gloves, finger by finger, and tucked them into my belt. I looked at Vanessa, then turned my gaze to Darren. "Thank you for the offer," I said. My voice wasn't loud. but it had the steel timbre of a command, and it silenced the room instantly. But I'm afraid I can't accept. Don't be proud, Demi, Darren scoffed, swirling his drink. It's charity. Take it. I can't take it, I continued, my eyes boring into his. Because my husband wouldn't be very happy if I quit my career to work for a company that is currently filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. Darren's face went from flushed to ghostly pale in a millisecond. Excuse me, he choked out. Your husband. Vanessa let out a shrill, nervous laugh. Husband? Oh, Demi, have you lost your mind? Did you hire an actor to impress us? You're delusional, am I? I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't look at them. I looked at the screen. I typed a single message to the contact saved as my North Star. Time on target. Execute. I hit send. I'm not the one pretending, Vanessa, I said softly. But the man outside, he doesn't pretend. At that exact moment, the heavy oak front door vibrated with an authoritative ding-dong. It wasn't a polite knock. It was a summons. The reckoning had arrived. After I dropped the bomb about my husband and the bankruptcy, the silence in the living room lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the room exploded into laughter. It wasn't a warm, genuine laugh. It was jagged and hysterical, led by Vanessa. She threw her head back, the sound of her cackle echoing off the walls like shattering glass. Your husband, she gasped, wiping a tear of mirth from her eye. Oh, Demi, honey, I knew you were desperate, but I didn't think you were delusional. What did you do? Hire some struggling actor from a local theater group to come here and pretend to love you? Darren shook his head, looking at me with that same nauseating mixture of pity and condescension. He walked over and patted my shoulder, his hand heavy and patronizing. Demi, he said, lowering his voice to a stage whisper so everyone could hear how caring he was. I get it. It's hard seeing us so successful while you're stuck. He gestured vaguely at my uniform. But lying like this, it's a cry for help. Maybe I should call a professional. I know a good psychiatrist who deals with midlife crises and pathological lying. The guests nodded in agreement, sipping their wine, whispering behind their hands. Poor thing, they mouthed. She's finally snapped. They didn't believe me. In their narrow materialistic worldview, it was physically impossible for a woman like me, dry, career-focused and unadorned, to attract a man, let alone a husband. Their contempt had reached the pinnacle of ignorance. They were standing on the deck of the Titanic, mocking the iceberg, completely unaware that the hull had already been breached. 50 yards away, the atmosphere was entirely different. A black Cadillac Escalade, sleek and ominous like a shark in dark water, idled at the curb. Rainwater beaded on the bulletproof glass, reflecting the gray Ohio sky. Inside, the air was conditioned to a perfect 68 degrees, smelling faintly of leather and expensive cologne. Marcus Hamilton sat in the back seat. He wasn't laughing. He was adjusting his white gold cufflinks with surgical precision. On his lap sat an iPad Pro, the screen glowing with a dossier that would end Darren Mitchell's career. Federal tax liens totaling $400,000, Marcus murmured to himself, scrolling through the PDF. Payroll miss for the last 3 months. 2 lawsuits from subcontractors for non-payment. And here it is. The second mortgage on the house, taken out at a predatory interest rate just to lease a Mercedes and buy a fake ring. He shook his head. He hadn't flown across the country to get into a fistfight with Darren. That was beneath him. He was here to dismantle Darren with the most lethal weapon in America. The truth. Beside him on the leather seat lay a bouquet of white tulips. In the language of flowers, they symbolize forgiveness and new beginnings. But today, Marcus intended them to be a funeral wreath for Darren's ego. Sir. His driver and head of security, a massive man named Silas, spoke from the front. We are clear. Do you want me to accompany you to the door? No, Silas, Marcus said, closing the iPad. I want to look him in the eye myself. Just keep the umbrella ready. Marcus stepped out of the vehicle. His hand-stitched Italian leather shoes hit the wet pavement with a solid, authoritative thud. Silas was there instantly, holding a large black umbrella over him, shielding him from the drizzle. As Marcus walked up the driveway, neighbors who were walking their dogs stopped to stare. In this quiet suburban neighborhood, Marcus didn't look like a guest. He moved with the easy, terrifying confidence of a general entering a territory he had already conquered. He knew his wife was in there. He knew she was taking fire, and he was about to turn those verbal bullets into dust. He reached the front porch. He didn't knock. He pressed the doorbell. Ding dong. The chime cut through the laughter inside the house like a knife. Who is that now? Vanessa hooted, annoyed that her performance was interrupted. She swirled her wine glass, not bothering to move. Probably the delivery guy with the extra case of Pinot Noir I ordered. Demi, get the door, will you? And tell him to take the empty boxes with him. She waved her hand at me, dismissing me like a servant for the 10th time that day. I stood up slowly. I didn't look at the door immediately. I took a second to brush an invisible speck of dust from my blue uniform. I smoothed the fabric over my heart, feeling the steady rhythm of my own pulse. I wasn't afraid anymore. I felt a strange, vibrating excitement, the adrenaline of a soldier hearing air support arriving overhead. I looked Darren dead in the eyes one last time. It's not the wine delivery, Darren, I said quietly. My voice was steady, cutting through the murmurs of the room. That is the man who is about to teach you a very painful lesson in what it actually means to be a provider. Just get the door, Demi. Vanessa shrieked. I turned my back on them. I walked down the hallway, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Each step felt heavier, more significant than the last. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from fear, but from anticipation. I reached for the heavy brass handle of the oak door. I took a deep breath, inhaling the stale air of the house one last time before letting the fresh air in. I turned the knob. I pulled. The door swung open, and the gray light of the outside world flooded into the hallway, outlining the silhouette of the man standing there. The wait was over. When Marcus Hamilton stepped across the threshold, the air in the living room didn't just change, it evaporated. He brought with him the kind of heavy, suffocating gravity that only truly powerful men possess. He stood 6 feet 2 inches, towering over Darren, his charcoal suit absorbing the light rather than reflecting it. He didn't look at the stunned guests holding their cheap appetizers. He didn't look at Darren, who was frozen mid-laugh. He walked straight to me, his strides measured and calm, parting the crowd like the Red Sea. He stopped in front of me, ignoring the chaos of the room entirely. He held out the bouquet of white tulips, crisp, elegant and understated. "Sorry I'm late, Captain," he said, his voice a rich baritone that vibrated against the walls. He leaned down and kissed my forehead, his lips warm against my cold skin. The flight from DC was delayed on the tarmac. You know how the private airfield gets in this weather. Private airfield. The room went deathly silent. Vanessa, who had been holding her glass of Pinot Noir like a scepter, stared at Marcus. Her eyes darted from the cut of his Italian suit to the watch on his left wrist. It was a Patek Philippe Nautilus, a timepiece that cost more than this entire house. The realization hit her so hard that her fingers went numb. Crash. The wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the beige carpet. A dark red stain began to spread rapidly, looking like a fresh gunshot wound on the floor, but nobody moved to clean it up. They were too paralyzed by what was happening to Darren. Darren was standing dead still. His face had drained of all color, turning a sickly shade of gray. He wasn't looking at Marcus as a rival. He was looking at him as an executioner. He recognized the man, not because they were friends, but because Marcus was the predator Darren had been running from. Mr. Hamilton," Darren stammered, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "Director Hamilton of Apex Defense." Marcus finally turned his head. He looked at Darren with the mild, disinterested curiosity one might show a bug before stepping on it. "Oh, Mitchell," Marcus said. His tone was light, yet it carried the weight of a sledgehammer. "I didn't expect to see you here. I assumed you would be in your office frantically explaining that $2 million tax lien to the IRS agents currently auditing your books." The sentence hung in the air like toxic smoke. The guests gasped. Uncle Bob lowered his beer. The smile vanished from my aunt's face. Darren choked. Sweat instantly beaded on his forehead. That's a misunderstanding. We're restructuring." "Restructuring?" Marcus laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Is that what we call Chapter 11 bankruptcy these days? My compliance team flagged your file this morning, Darren. You leveraged this house, your wife's parents' house, to secure a loan you had no intention of paying back. You're not just broke, you're about to be homeless." Vanessa let out a strangled cry. She rushed forward, grabbing Darren's arm, her fingernails digging into his suit jacket. "What is he talking about, Darren? You said the business was booming. You said we were buying a boat." She turned to Marcus, her eyes wide with panic and confusion. "How do you know this? Who are you?" Marcus didn't answer her immediately. He stepped closer to me, sliding his arm around my waist. His grip was firm, possessive, and incredibly grounding. "I am the man who just acquired the Department of Defense logistics contract that your husband tried to bribe his way into," Marcus said calmly. "I'm the reason his company is dissolving." He paused, letting the information sink in. Then he delivered the final blow. "But more importantly," Marcus continued, his voice dropping an octave, becoming deadly serious. I am Demi's husband. We've been married for 2 years. Vanessa's mouth fell open. She looked from the sapphire ring on my finger to the man holding me, realizing that the actor she mocked was actually the most powerful man in the state. Marcus looked Vanessa dead in the eye. And I want to thank you, Vanessa. Thank me, she whispered, trembling. Yes, Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Thank you for taking this man off her hands 4 years ago. If you hadn't been so greedy, if you hadn't stolen him, I never would have met Demi. You took the trash out so I could find the treasure. For that, I am genuinely grateful. It was a double tap to the heart. He hadn't just beaten them financially. He had completely dismantled their moral victory. He framed their betrayal not as a loss for me, but as the greatest favor anyone had ever done for me. Darren's legs gave out. He sank into the nearest armchair, looking like a deflated balloon. He looked up at me, desperation in his eyes. Demi, he pleaded, his voice wet with tears. Please, Mr. Hamilton, Marcus, we're family. Demi is my ex-fiancé. You can't let them take the house. My reputation. Marcus cut him off. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ex-fiancé. Marcus repeated, his voice icy. You lost the right to speak her name when you betrayed her. She isn't your ex anything. She is Mrs. Hamilton. And the Hamilton family does not do business with liars. Marcus turned his gaze to the room full of gawking relatives. The flying monkeys who had spent the last hour mocking me. This party is over, Marcus announced. He didn't shout, but the authority in his voice was absolute. My wife has had a long day, and she needs to grieve her father in peace. I suggest you all leave now. There was no protest. No one stayed to finish their wine. The shame in the room was palpable. They grabbed their coats and purses, scrambling for the door like cockroaches when the lights turned on. Within 2 minutes, the house was silent, save for the sound of Vanessa sobbing on the floor next to the red wine stain that looked so much like the death of her fake life. Within 5 minutes, the house was empty. The friends and relatives who had been drinking Darren's wine and eating his shrimp cocktail vanished the moment the smell of failure entered the room. Now it was just the 4 of us standing in the wreckage of the living room. Marcus, me, and the 2 people who had tried to destroy my life. The silence was heavy, broken only by the aggressive buzzing of a cell phone on the coffee table. It was Darren's phone. The screen lit up, flashing a number with an 800 area code. Darren stared at it, his hands shaking by his sides. He made no move to answer it. You should probably get that, Mitchell, Marcus said, leaning casually against the mantelpiece. That's the 3rd time they've called in 10 minutes. Creditors are persistent. I can't, Darren whispered, sweat trickling down his temple. Then I will. Marcus reached forward and tapped the speakerphone icon before Darren could stop him. A woman's voice, sharp and professional, filled the room. Mr. Mitchell, this is Wells Fargo Home Mortgage. We have attempted to reach you by mail and phone. This is your final notification regarding the property at 42 Elm Street. Since we have not received the past due balance of $14,000, foreclosure proceedings will officially begin tomorrow morning. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. The color drained from Vanessa's face so fast I thought she was going to faint. She whipped her head toward Darren, her eyes bulging. Foreclosure, she shrieked. Darren, you told me you paid off the mortgage. You said the business was having its best quarter ever. Darren hung his head, looking at his expensive Italian loafers, which I realized now were probably put on a credit card he couldn't pay. I had to move some money around, he mumbled. To keep up appearances, the lease on the Mercedes, your wardrobe, the parties, it cost money, Vanessa. So you lied to me. Vanessa screamed, grabbing a throw pillow and hurling it at him. We're homeless. You made me homeless. It was a pathetic scene. The facade of the perfect couple was crumbling in real time, revealing the rot underneath. Vanessa turned away from him, panting. Her eyes landed on my hand, specifically on the cashmere sapphire ring Marcus had given me. It glowed deep blue in the lamplight, heavy with history and value. Then she looked down at the massive rock on her own finger, the one she had been flashing in my face all day. But the ring, she stammered, twisting it on her finger. Darren said this was an investment. He said it was worth $50,000. We can sell it. We can pay the bank. Marcus let out a short, dry chuckle. He walked over, glancing at Vanessa's hand without touching it. Vanessa, Marcus said, his voice dripping with pity. That isn't a diamond. It's moissanite. High quality, sure, but synthetic. You can buy that exact ring on Amazon for about $200, maybe $300 if you pay for overnight shipping. He gestured to my hand. My wife's ring, however, is a natural cashmere sapphire, custom set by Harry Winston. It's insured for more than the value of this entire house. Please stop comparing yourself to her. You lost that game a long time ago. The realization hit Vanessa like a physical blow. Her knees buckled. She wasn't crying because she loved Aaron and he had lied. She was crying because she had backed the wrong horse. She had thrown away her sister for a man she thought was a gold mine, only to find out he was a sinkhole. With a guttural scream of rage, Vanessa ripped the ring off her finger. She threw it at Darren with all her might. It bounced off his forehead and skittered under the sofa. A piece of cheap glass lost in the dust. I hate you, she sobbed. You fraud. You ruined my life. Darren didn't look at her. He looked at me. In a move that made my stomach turn, he dropped to his knees. He actually crawled 2 feet toward me, his hands clasped together. Demi. He wept, snot running down his nose. Demi, please. You have to talk to him. You know me. We grew up together. Just ask Marcus to give me a subcontract. Anything. A consulting gig. I just need a lifeline. He reached out, trying to grab the hem of my pants. I took a sharp step back. Don't, I said, my voice cold. Please, Demi, he wailed. Do it for Mom and Dad. What would they think if they saw me like this? They loved me like a son. They wouldn't want me on the street. A wave of nausea washed over me. He dared to invoke my parents. The parents whose medical bills he ignored. The parents whose funeral he turned into a networking event. Do not speak about my parents, I said, pointing a finger at him. You stood in front of their casket today and lied about paying for their care. You insulted my rank. You tried to hire me as a secretary to humiliate me, and now you want me to save you. I looked down at him, a man I once thought was the love of my life. He looks so small now, so pathetic. No, Darren, I said. I won't save you. You are a grown man. You made your bed with lies. Now you have to sleep in it. Clean up your own trash. I felt a hand on the small of my back. Warm, solid. Let's go, Demi, Marcus said softly. The air in here is getting toxic. We turned around and walked toward the front door. Behind us, the sounds of chaos erupted again. Vanessa was screaming about her credit score. Darren was sobbing. They were turning on each other. 2 drowning people trying to climb on top of one another to survive. I stepped out onto the porch. The rain had stopped. The night air of Ohio was cold, crisp, and incredibly clean. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with it. I walked down the steps to the waiting Cadillac. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't need to. That life, the life of the victim, the life of the dry sister, the life of the woman who wasn't enough, was dead. It died in that living room. I climbed into the car, and for the first time in 4 years, the knot in my chest completely uncoiled. I had one, and I didn't even have to fire a single shot. The flight back to Seattle was quiet. The hum of the jet engines created a cocoon of white noise that separated us from the chaos we had left behind in Ohio. Marcus was asleep in the seat next to me, his hand resting protectively over mine. In my lap lay the only thing I had taken from my parents' house before leaving, my father's old leather-bound journal. I had found it tucked away in the bottom drawer of his desk, hidden beneath stacks of medical bills that I had paid. My hands trembled as I opened it to the last entry, dated just 3 weeks before he died. The handwriting was shaky, the script of a man whose body was failing, but whose mind was still sharp. I read the words through a blur of tears. I know Demi is suffering alone out there. She doesn't say it, but I hear it in her voice on the phone. My little girl is tough as steel, but even steel feels pain when it's forged in fire. Vanessa has chosen the path of appearance. She wants the world to look at her. But Demi chose honor. She wants to serve the world. I am so proud of my soldier. I only pray that one day she finds a man who is worthy of that brave heart. A sob escaped my throat, loud enough to wake Marcus. He didn't ask what was wrong. He saw the book, saw my face, and simply pulled me into his chest. I buried my face in his shirt, letting go of the last jagged piece of resentment I had been carrying. I hadn't been invisible. Dad had seen me. He had always seen me. I wasn't the black sheep. I was the quiet shepherd he trusted. I wasn't alone. 2 weeks later, the final test arrived in the form of a vibration on my phone. I was in the kitchen making coffee when a text message popped up. It was from Vanessa. It was a long, rambling block of text, devoid of any punctuation or apology. Demi, you have to help me. Darren took the car and left. He left me with nothing but the dead. The bank is coming on Monday. I have nowhere to go. You're rich now. You have to send me $10,000 just a loan. Please. We are sisters. Family helps family. I stared at the screen reading the words, family helps family. The audacity was breathtaking. This was the woman who told me I was unlovable. The woman who wore my uniform as a joke. The woman who tried to make me her husband's secretary. And now when the ship she drilled holes in was sinking, she wanted me to throw her a life vest made of cash. I looked out the kitchen window. In the backyard under the soft gray drizzle of the Seattle morning, Marcus was kneeling in the dirt. He was planting the bulbs we had bought earlier that week. I looked back at the phone. For years ago I would have sent the money. I would have tried to buy her love. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I didn't type a reply. I didn't lecture her. I simply tapped the small I icon in the corner of the screen, scrolled down to the bottom, and pressed block contact. The message disappeared. The connection was severed. It wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of self-preservation. I realized I had no responsibility to save the people who had tried to drown me. I put the phone down on the counter and walked out the back door. The air outside smelled of wet earth and pine needles, the signature scent of the Pacific Northwest. I walked over to the garden bed and knelt beside Marcus. My knees sank into the damp soil, ruining my clean sweatpants. But I didn't care. "Everything okay, Captain?" Marcus asked, wiping a smudge of dirt from his cheek. I looked at the row of white tulips he had just planted. In the spring they would bloom strong and resilient and pure. White tulips for forgiveness. Not forgiveness for them but forgiveness for myself. Forgiving myself for staying too long. Forgiving myself for believing I wasn't enough. "I'm okay," I said, grabbing a trowel to help him cover the bulbs. "Actually, I'm better than okay. I'm home." We spent the rest of the morning in silence working the earth, our hands dirty and cold, but our hearts full. Real happiness wasn't found in the clinking of champagne glasses, or the applause of a fake crowd. It was here in the quiet in the dirt with the one person who knew my soul. An hour later, I stood in front of the full-length mirror in our bedroom. I was dressed in my uniform. The blue fabric was crisp, the golden buttons gleaming under the lights. I ran my finger over the ribbons on my chest, each one a story of survival. Then I touched the faint scar under my chin. Darren had called it a flaw. Marcus called it a mark of courage. Today I just called it me. I reached for the tube of lipstick on the vanity. Burgundy, deep, dark and unapologetic. I applied it carefully, pressing my lips together. The color was bold against my skin. It was the color of a woman who had walked through hell and came out holding the torch. I adjusted my collar and squared my shoulders. I had a unit to lead. I had logistics to manage. I had a life to live. Life is a battlefield. We all take hits. We all get betrayed. We all have moments where we are standing in the rain, eating ramen noodles, wondering if we will ever be warm again. But as I looked at my reflection, I knew the truth. My name is Demi James. I was a victim. Then I was a survivor. Now I am a victor. Looking back, the most expensive lesson I paid for wasn't about money. It was about definition. For years, I allowed Vanessa and Darren to hold the pen that wrote my life story. They labeled me cold, unlovable, and broken. And for a long time I believed them. But here's the truth I want you to take with you today. Your value does not decrease based on someone else's inability to see your worth. Just because a customer at a yard sale thinks a diamond is a piece of glass, that doesn't change the nature of the stone. It is still a diamond. You must be the guardian of your own price tag. When the world tries to discount you, have the courage to double the price. Now I want to turn the floor over to you. Have you ever felt like the black sheep of your family? Or had someone try to define your worth for you? What did you do to reclaim your story? Tell me what you think, I really want to know. The air in here is getting toxic. We turned around and walked toward the front door. Behind us, the sounds of chaos erupted again. Vanessa was screaming about her credit score. Darren was sobbing. They were turning on each other. Two drowning people trying to climb on top of one another to survive. I stepped out onto the porch. The rain had stopped. The night air of Ohio was cold, crisp, and incredibly clean. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with it. I walked down the steps to the waiting Cadillac. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't need to. That life, the life of the victim, the life of the dry sister, the life of the woman who wasn't enough, was dead. It died in that living room. I climbed into the car, and for the first time in 4 years, the knot in my chest completely uncoiled. I had one, and I didn't even have to fire a single shot. The flight back to Seattle was quiet. The hum of the jet engines created a cocoon of white noise that separated us from the chaos we had left behind in Ohio. Marcus was asleep in the seat next to me, his hand resting protectively over mine. In my lap lay the only thing I had taken from my parents' house before leaving, my father's old leather-bound journal. I had found it tucked away in the bottom drawer of his desk, hidden beneath stacks of medical bills that I had paid. My hands trembled as I opened it to the last entry. Dated just 3 weeks before he died. The handwriting was shaky, the script of a man whose body was failing, but whose mind was still sharp. I read the words through a blur of tears. I know Demi is suffering alone out there. She doesn't say it, but I hear it in her voice on the phone. My little girl is tough as steel, but even steel feels pain when it's forged in fire. Vanessa has chosen the path of appearance. She wants the world to look at her. But Demi chose honor. She wants to serve the world. I am so proud of my soldier. I only pray that one day she finds a man who is worthy of that brave heart. A sob escaped my throat, loud enough to wake Marcus. He didn't ask what was wrong. He saw the book, saw my face, and simply pulled me into his chest. I buried my face in his shirt, letting go of the last jagged piece of resentment I had been carrying. I hadn't been invisible. Dad had seen me. He had always seen me. I wasn't the black sheep. I was the quiet shepherd he trusted. I wasn't alone. 2 weeks later, the final test arrived in the form of a vibration on my phone. I was in the kitchen making coffee when a text message popped up. It was from Vanessa. It was a long rambling block of text, devoid of any punctuation or apology. Demi, you have to help me. Darren took the car and left. He left me with nothing but the dead. The bank is coming on Monday. I have nowhere to go. You're rich now. You have to send me $10,000 just a loan. Please. We are sisters. Family helps family. I stared at the screen reading the words, family helps family. The audacity was breathtaking. This was the woman who told me I was unlovable. The woman who wore my uniform as a joke. The woman who tried to make me her husband's secretary. And now, when the ship she drilled holes in was sinking, she wanted me to throw her a life vest made of cash. I looked out the kitchen window. In the backyard, under the soft gray drizzle of the Seattle morning, Marcus was kneeling in the dirt. He was planting the bulbs we had bought earlier that week. I looked back at the phone. For years ago, I would have sent the money. I would have tried to buy her love. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I didn't type a reply. I didn't lecture her. I simply tapped the small I icon in the corner of the screen, scrolled down to the bottom, and pressed block contact. The message disappeared. The connection was severed. It wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of self-preservation. I realized I had no responsibility to save the people who had tried to drown me. I put the phone down on the counter and walked out the back door. The air outside smelled of wet earth and pine needles, the signature scent of the Pacific Northwest. I walked over to the garden bed and knelt beside Marcus. My knees sank into the damp soil, ruining my clean sweatpants. But I didn't care. Everything okay, Captain? Marcus asked, wiping a smudge of dirt from his cheek. I looked at the row of white tulips he had just planted. In the spring they would bloom strong and resilient and pure. White tulips for forgiveness. Not forgiveness for them, but forgiveness for myself. Forgiving myself for staying too long. Forgiving myself for believing I wasn't enough. I'm okay, I said, grabbing a trowel to help him cover the bulbs. Actually, I'm better than okay. I'm home. We spent the rest of the morning in silence, working the earth, our hands dirty and cold, but our hearts full. Real happiness wasn't found in the clinking of champagne glasses, or the applause of a fake crowd. It was here in the quiet, in the dirt, with the one person who knew my soul. An hour later, I stood in front of the full-length mirror in our bedroom. I was dressed in my uniform. The blue fabric was crisp, the golden buttons gleaming under the lights. I ran my finger over the ribbons on my chest, each one a story of survival. Then I touched the faint scar under my chin. Darren had called it a flaw. Marcus called it a mark of courage. Today I just called it me. I reached for the tube of lipstick on the vanity. Burgundy, deep, dark, and unapologetic. I applied it carefully, pressing my lips together. The color was bold against my skin. It was the color of a woman who had walked through hell and came out holding the torch. I adjusted my collar and squared my shoulders. I had a unit to lead. I had logistics to manage. I had a life to live. Life is a battlefield. We all take hits. We all get betrayed. We all have moments where we are standing in the rain, eating ramen noodles, wondering if we will ever be warm again. But as I looked at my reflection, I knew the truth. My name is Demi James. I was a victim. Then I was a survivor. Now I am a victor. Looking back, the most expensive lesson I paid for wasn't about money. It was about definition. For years, I allowed Vanessa and Darren to hold the pen that wrote my life story. They labeled me cold, unlovable, and broken. And for a long time I believed them. But here's the truth I want you to take with you today. Your value does not decrease based on someone else's inability to see your worth. Just because a customer at a yard sale thinks a diamond is a piece of glass, that doesn't change the nature of the stone. It is still a diamond. You must be the guardian of your own price tag. When the world tries to discount you, have the courage to double the price. Now I want to turn the floor over to you. Have you ever felt like the black sheep of your family? Or had someone try to define your worth for you? What did you do to reclaim your story? Tell me what you think, I really want to know.